All right, this is take 2. This is the Molyneux Podcast Knowledge 1 of 4 is how it's labeled. And to sort of flow right into from my last video that I just did, I'm going to talk about basically at the end of his lecture on this podcast, he hooks up quite well with the material that we were talking about in the last podcast, and he has this interesting quote, logic is not just something human beings make up, end quote. And that's a huge deal. He's coming down really hard on one side of the fence. Is mathematics as a discipline, or the principles of mathematics, the rules that mathematicians use, all that business, are they discovered or created? And he's obviously coming down hard on the side of the fence of saying that they're discovered. But far greater minds than he or I are still open on the question of whether or not mathematics is something that we humans create, or if mathematics is something that we humans discovered. Likewise for logic. And we also, too, you can't assume that logic and mathematics are too closely related. And then this is really where the crux of the issue, when I was talking about logic from sense data at the end of the last video, this is the crux of the issue. He just says, quote, there are 3 basic laws of logic. Aristotle defined them, end quote. And then he encourages you to go to Wikipedia and look up Aristotle's laws of logic. Unfortunately, he's completely ignoring Gottlob Frege and, most importantly, Kurt Gödel. Gödel, however you say his German name, right? Kurt Gödel. The undecidability stuff. I'll talk more about that as necessary. But yeah, Aristotle is not really where you need to be going for this, buddy. And he does that in the podcast. He waves off his hand. He says, well, if you're interested in the basic laws of logic that we derive from sense data, then look it up from Aristotle. But the problem is that Aristotle is not really what we need to be talking about here. It's very much a situation where he's kind of saying, go back to medicine before penicillin, If he's going to say that logic is derived from sense data, and then if he's going to encourage you to look up logic and says, go look up the Aristotelian treatment of the subject, that's a real problem, because the most important advances in human history are happening right now because of advances in logic. The advances in logic that completely overturn anything having to do with anything Aristotle said. And so he encourages you to look up the Aristotelian laws of logic, and he completely ignores, and this ties very deeply to subatomic physics and quantum computing and all these kinds of issues. Because you can start talking about stuff, and it's just a chicken before the egg problem that's very, very complicated, because are we getting our highly developed forms of logic from, it's just really messy. Really, really messy. And you can go back to the scholastics back in the whatever centuries ago, and you can see treatments of modal logic back then, and you can see treatments of many-valued logics. I mean, non-binary logics. You can see those treatments existing in the scholastic literature. And that's really what's going on here, is they're talking about non-binary logic systems. And superposition in quantum mechanics makes it way crazier. But in essence, we're talking about many-valued logics. And Molyneux does not allow for many-valued logics. We're not talking at all about many-valued logics right now, but I'm just letting you know that he doesn't accept them. And he's like the only guy on planet Earth. And the reason why he doesn't accept them is because if you accept many-valued logics, it makes it more difficult for you to be dogmatic about other things that you're trying to convince people of. If you're Peter Schiff and you're trying to convince everybody that gold is the greatest thing in the world, or if you're, Donald Trump or Bill O'Reilly or whatever, then what you do is you say that logic begins and ends with Aristotle, and you ignore the complications that have cropped up as we as human beings have progressed. And these are all sheer super signs of sophistry. He's got a video where he talks about beware of the sophists. Well, this is just sophistry on his part. And then perhaps the most succinct statement that he makes is, quote, the reason we have logic is the behavior of matter in the real world is logical. And I made some comments, and you can think about that yourself. I mean, seriously, sit around and think about yourself. Ask yourself, is the matter in the real world logical? Is the behavior of matter in the real world logical? You know, and all you need to do is find one instance in the real world where the behavior of matter is not logical, and your belief that we derive logic from the real world crumbles. So, you know, and it's not, a lot of people agree on the most basic things. It's not about whether or not you agree that the sky is purple. We all agree that the sky is blue, you know. And the interesting part comes when you try to explain why the sky is blue. So, and he just wants to cut that off. He wants to, you know, so. He goes into some interesting discussion about object constancy, which I thought was pretty important, pretty cool. Unfortunately, it does not carry the water that he's asking it to carry. Quote, material reality is logical, end quote. You know, just over and over again, just completely disregarding and ignoring subatomic physics. So back to the beginning of this second lecture. There's a lot more going on in this one. These last two videos have been kind of about logic and their connection to the real world.